The smell of burned coolant and recycled air was so normal to Ren Adler that he did not even notice it anymore. He had been lying on his back under pressure valve for 6 straight hours, flashlight clenched in his teeth, hands slick with hydraulic fluid. The valve was cracked in 3 places. Nobody had flagged it. Nobody had cared. If he had not caught it on his own routine check, 40 liters of coolant would have dumped into the oxygen recyclers and put an entire deck on emergency rations for a week. He caught it, he fixed it, nobody said thank you. His supervisor Doss, a broad-shouldered grin with grey skin and permanently narrowed eyes, was waiting when Ren finally crawled out from under the service panel. You were supposed to finish the post-event diagnostic on the bonding chamber an hour ago, Doss said. Ren sat up, wiped his hands on a rag that was already too dirty to help, and nodded. Pressure valve in corridor 9 was cracked, had to fix it first. The diagnostic was scheduled. The valve would have failed by morning. Doss looked at him the way most people on Waystation Orange 7 looked at Ren, like he was a minor inconvenience that had not yet learned its place. Finish the diagnostic, then file a maintenance report for the valve, in that order next time. He left. Ren stood up slowly, rolled his stiff shoulders, and picked up his kit. The grand selection had happened today. He had almost forgotten. 8 dragon hatchlings, Drakkar, in the official Conclave language, had been claimed by riders from the most powerful species in the galaxy. Velhari nobles, Grin warriors, Orath scholars. The upper decks were still buzzing with it. A big ceremony, lots of important beings shaking hands and signing bond registers, and taking credit for things that the Drakkar had no say in. Ren had been fixing a valve. He found the bonding chamber through the service corridor at the back, the one used by maintenance crews, not delegates. He badged through, pulled up the diagnostic interface on his tablet, and started running the atmospheric checks. Temperature, pressure, humidity, filter efficiency. Standard stuff. He moved through the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He almost missed her. She was under the ceremonial dais, a low stone platform at the center of the room where the hatchlings had been presented. The chamber was empty now, banners still hanging, the air still faintly warm from all the bodies that had filled it hours ago. But there was a shape under the edge of the dais. Small, dark, very still. Ren crouched down. It was a Drakkar hatchling, not much bigger than a large dog, curled tight into herself, scales the color of deep space, nearly black, with the faintest shimmer of violet when the light caught them. One of her wings sat wrong, the left one, folded at an angle that looked like it had never healed right. She was shivering, not from cold, the chamber was warm enough, just shivering. Ren looked around, nobody else was here, he looked back at her. He did not know the law. He did not know that touching an unchosen Drakkar before the termination process was a violation of Conclave code. He did not know the word for what she was, technically, a selection remainder, scheduled for humane disposal within 72 hours, because an unbonded Drakkar was considered a liability, and the Conclave did not do sentiment. He just saw a small creature alone in a cold room, and he had been in enough cold rooms alone to understand the feeling. He sat down on the floor, not close enough to crowd her, just near. She opened one eye. It was gold, a deep, burning gold, too sharp and too aware for something her size. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they are deciding whether to trust. Ren did not move. He reached into the front pocket of his work vest and pulled out a ration bar, the dense, flavorless kind that maintenance workers carried, because you never knew when a job was going to run 6 hours longer than planned. He set it on the floor between them and pulled his hand back. She stared at the ration bar, then at him, then at the ration bar again. She unfolded one careful foreleg and pulled it toward her. She ate it in 2 bites. Then she looked at him again with those gold eyes, and something in her posture changed, not trust exactly, not yet, but the specific kind of stillness that happens when a creature decides it is not going to run. Ren went back to his diagnostic. He ran the checks quietly, moving around the edge of the chamber, not making sudden movements. She watched him the whole time. After about 20 minutes, She had crawled out from under the dais entirely and was sitting in the open, tracking him with those gold eyes as he worked. He was kneeling at the far atmospheric panel when he heard the door open behind him, not the service door, the main one, boots on the floor, the sharp, clean sound of official conclave footwear. Warden Celis was a tall Velhari with pale silver skin and the kind of posture that came from years of being the most important person in every room she entered. She stopped when she saw Wren. Then she looked at the hatchling. The hatchling's scales had begun to glow. Not brightly, just a faint pulse, slow and deep, running from her spine outward. Celis went very still. Her eyes moved to Wren, then back to the hatchling, then back to Wren. "What," Celis said, in a voice that was very carefully controlled, "did you do?" Wren looked at the hatchling, looked at the glow, looked at his own hands. "I fixed a pressure valve," he said, "and I gave her a ration bar." Celis did not respond. She was already reaching for her comm. Nobody slept that night, not the conclave officers, not the delegate representatives who had to be pulled back from their departure ships, not Warden Celis, who had been filing emergency communications for 4 hours straight by the time anyone thought to ask Wren if he wanted something to eat. He did not mind. He sat in a small holding room just off the bonding chamber with a cup of station-grade broth and waited. The hatchling, still glowing faintly, that slow violet pulse that nobody on the station had seen before, refused to go back to her containment berth. She sat beside Wren's chair with her chin on his knee and her gold eyes half closed. Every time a conclave officer tried to coax her away, she showed all of her small, very sharp teeth and did not move. They stopped trying after the third attempt. The glow was the problem. Everyone knew what it was. They just did not want to say it. The resonance flare only happened during an active bonding event. 8 Drakkar had been formally bonded the day through centuries of careful ritual and species-tested compatibility. None of those 8 were glowing yet. They were still in dormancy, the slow biological process that followed selection. The reject under the dais was mid-resonance with a human maintenance worker. By the next morning, Wren was sitting in a conference room that smelled of expensive air filtration and institutional anxiety. The table was too large, the chairs were too tall, and the 7 beings seated across from him had the collective expression of people who had been asked to solve a problem that should not exist. A Velhari representative with a long braided chain of office spoke first. She asked, slowly and clearly, as if Wren might not understand, how he had gained access to the chamber during the restricted window. Wren explained that he had a maintenance badge and a diagnostic schedule. A Grin representative, not DOS, someone more senior, with campaign scars on his forearms, asked how Wren had triggered the bonding protocol. Wren explained that he had not known there was a bonding protocol. He had given her something to eat. An Orath representative, long-fingered and pale, said that what Wren was describing was not how bonding worked. Wren said he understood that, he just didn't know what else to tell them. The room went back and forth like this for almost an hour. Wren answered every question the same way, plainly, without defense, without apology. He had not done anything secret. He had not done anything clever. He had sat on a floor and shared a ration bar. If that had caused all of this, he was genuinely sorry for the inconvenience, but he was not sure how he could have done it differently without just leaving her there alone, and that had not seemed right. There was a long silence after that. Then a quieter voice came from the far end of the table. An older being, a Duran, compact and grey-haired, with ink-stained fingers and small, very alert eyes. Dr. Ivil had been watching the whole proceeding without speaking. Now he cleared his throat. He told the room, in the measured way of a man who had been studying something for 40 years and had learned to choose his words carefully, that the resonance flare was not something that could be triggered by a trick or a manipulation. It was a biological response. It happened when a Drakkar's nervous system detected a compatible host, a person whose cognitive and emotional patterns matched what the Drakkar's own system was reaching for. The compatibility index was measured, he added, in several categories. He had been running the numbers since last night. He set a data sheet on the table. He said that the hatchling's bond metrics with Ren Adler were the highest he had recorded in 4 decades of Drakkar research. Nobody at the table said anything. Ivel also noted that conclave law was clear on one point. A completed resonance bond could not be dissolved without lethal harm to both parties. The hatchling's bond was complete. It had completed itself in approximately 20 minutes, which was, he added quietly, also a record. The Velhari representative asked what he was suggesting. He said he was not suggesting anything. He was informing them of the facts. What they did with the facts was their business. What they did was the most political thing available. They did nothing official and called it a classification. Ren was placed on provisional bond status, a category that did not really exist in the formal registry, invented on the spot, which meant he had the legal standing of a bonded rider, but none of the rank, resources, or recognition. He was to remain on Waystation Orin 7. He was to be monitored. The expectation, spoken aloud by 2 of the 7 people in that room, was that the bond would destabilize on its own. The hatchling would realize her error. These things had precedent. Ivel said nothing. He wrote something in his notebook. Ren was given a new room assignment, slightly larger than his old bunk, still in the maintenance wing, and a data tablet with his bond registry number and his new status coded in Velhari script. He looked at the tablet. He looked at the conclave officer who handed it to him. He asked if anyone could tell him what it said. The officer blinked, then turned and walked away. Ren looked down at the tablet. The hatchling pressed against his side, warm and solid, her scales cycling through that slow violet glow. He put the tablet in his vest pocket. "I'll figure it out," he said to nobody in particular. She made a low sound in her chest, not a growl, not a purr, something between the two, like a machine running smooth. He had the feeling, though he could not explain it, that she already knew he would. 3 months passed. Nobody in the conclave made a formal decision about Ren and the hatchling, which meant nobody had to admit that the situation was real. The conclave was very good at this. Ren went back to work. The hatchling, he had started calling her Sable because of the color, because he needed something to call her, and because she had not objected, was assigned a habitat berth in a repurposed cargo bay on the station's lower level. It was big enough, barely, and it had been empty for years. The conclave provided nothing to furnish it. Ren furnished it himself. He worked his regular maintenance shifts and spent his off hours in the bay with salvage material and a welding rig, a water recirculation pool from old plumbing components, a perch frame from scrap alloy padded with insulation foam wrapped in canvas, a heating coil he rerouted from a disused server rack. It took 6 weekends. He did not consider this unusual. It was a broken space that needed fixing. He fixed it. Sable watched him work from the first day. She did not sleep, did not wander, did not do the things the conclave's existing Drakkar behavioral documentation said young hatchlings did. She sat and she watched. When he was under something fiddling with a connection he could not see, she would reposition a light strip with her tail so the angle was better. The first time it happened, Ren stopped and looked at her. She looked back at him with those gold eyes, patient, waiting. He said thank you and went back to work. She tilted her head slightly, as if filing this away. She was not what any of the official literature described. The conclave's Drakkar documentation, which Dr. Ivel lent Ren in a battered translated copy, described hatchlings as instinct-driven, territorial, and nonverbal until their 2nd year. Sable communicated constantly, not with sounds mostly, though she had a range of those too, from the low running engine sound that meant she was content, to a sharp clicking she made when something bothered her. She communicated in other ways. Scale color. Posture, small precise movements of her tail or her wings. And then slowly something else. Impressions. Ren started noticing them around week 6, not thoughts exactly, not words, just feelings that arrived in his head that were not his. A sudden spike of alertness when a stranger entered the bay. A deep, satisfied warmth when he brought her a portion of his dinner. Once, vividly, a feeling of dark amusement when Doss walked past the bay entrance and stumbled over a threshold strip. He had not imagined that one, he was sure of it. Dr. Ivel visited on rest days. He brought his notebook and asked questions and never seemed to run out of either. He told Ren that what he was describing, the emotional impressions, was called bond sense, and that it typically developed over years in established pairs. He wrote the 6-week figure down and underlined it twice. He also looked at Sable's wing. The left one had never been treated after the hatching injury. The bone had set wrong, the joints sat at the wrong angle, and it made her fold the wing awkwardly against her body, like she was always trying to hide it. The Conclave's medical staff had not treated it because they had not expected her to survive selection. There had been no point. Ivil said he would arrange a bone specialist, a proper procedure under sedation with the right tools. Ren thanked him. Then he reached into his kit bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He had been working on it for 2 weeks. It was a diagram, a brace system, adjustable in 3 joints, designed from basic mechanical principles to guide a misset bone back into alignment over 6 to 8 weeks without surgery. He had based it on splinting techniques from an old human medical manual and adapted them using Drakkar bone density figures from Ivil's own published papers. He had built a prototype from station alloy and medical-grade padding. It was sitting in the corner of the bay, already fitted and adjusted. He asked Ivil to check the biology. He just wanted a second opinion. Ivil looked at the diagram for a long time. He looked at the prototype. He looked at Ren. He said very quietly that the design was correct. More than correct, it was elegant. Ren shrugged. It was just a structural problem, he said. Most structural problems have a clean solution if you take enough time with them. Ivil wrote 3 pages of notes that afternoon. The real test came at the end of the 3rd month. A freight hauler running docking bay 4 lost thruster control during final approach, a guidance system failure that fired the port thruster instead of killing it. The ship skidded sideways and sheared off a docking clamp with enough force to crack the outer hull coupling. Pressure alarms started screaming across the whole lower level. Ren was already running toward it. He was the on-call tech. This was his job. He did not know Sable had felt it through the bond, the spike of danger, the direction, the urgency of it, until he heard the crash of her bay doors coming off their hinges behind him. She moved through the service corridor at a speed that should not have been possible for something still wearing a wing brace, and she was beside him before he reached the breach site. There was no plan, there was no training, there was no one giving orders. Sable pressed her body against the outer hull gap, her scales locked together under pressure, forming a surface dense and tight enough to hold vacuum at bay. Ren dove into the internal access panel and worked the pressure seals from the inside, both hands moving, no wasted motion, patching and rerouting, and forcing the damaged coupling into emergency lock. It took 11 minutes. 42 people on the lower deck did not have to evacuate. Ren sat down on the floor afterward with his back against the wall and his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Sable settled beside him. She was not shaking at all. She pressed her nose to the side of his head, very gently, and made the low running engine sound. He sat there with her for a while before either of them moved. The Conclave filed a formal maintenance complaint about the destroyed bay doors the following day. The incident report from the docking breach was public record. That was the thing about Conclave incident reports. They had to be. For liability reasons, 42 people signed survival acknowledgements, 42 people knew what had sealed that hull gap, and 42 people talked. Not loudly, not with ceremony, but the story moved the way true things move, through comm channels and mess hall conversations and brief messages sent to people on other stations. A human maintenance tech and an unchosen hatchling had stopped a pressure breach in 11 minutes with no backup, no authorization, and no plan. The hatchling had used her own body as a seal. The man had patched the internals blind. The Conclave did not announce it. They also could not deny it. Meanwhile, the 8 properly bonded pairs from the Grand Selection had completed their dormancy phases. They were presented at a formal ceremony at Hub Meridian, 8 riders in polished ceremonial dress, 8 Drakkar in the full iridescence of their first active bond glow. They were magnificent, a Velhari Duchess in silver, a Grin Battle Lord with a red-scaled partner built like a warship. an Orath sage and her blue serpentine companion who could interface directly with orbital communication networks. The images went everywhere. This was what a bonded pair was supposed to look like. Somewhere in the Conclave's registry, quietly and without announcement, the bond coherence metrics for all 9 active pairs were being compiled. 8 of the 9 looked exactly as expected. The 9th was an outlier in the way that a mountain is an outlier in a flat field, not just different in degree, but different in kind. Dr. Ivil had access to the raw data. He read it 3 times to make sure he had not made an error. He had not made an error. He told Wren over a shared lunch in the maintenance wing, the only place on the station where people did not look at Wren like he was a problem, and he kept his voice level and informational the way a doctor gives hard news. He said that in 6 of the 11 bond metrics used by the Conclave to classify pairs, Wren and Sable scored at the top of the active registry, not near the top, at it. The only pair close to them in raw output was the Velhari Duchess's Silver Drakkar, and only on 1 category. Wren chewed his food and thought about this. He asked what the Conclave was going to do with that information. Ivil said they had quietly reclassified the data as preliminary. They would not be publishing it. Wren nodded slowly. He said that made sense. Then he went back to work. Sable was growing. This was the other thing nobody wanted to talk about. Drakkar matured over years. The standard bonded pair did not reach operational size for 18 to 24 months after selection. Sable, at the 3-month mark, was already the size of a small shuttle craft. Her scale density had exceeded the upper range of standard projection charts. The fold sense, the biological ability to perceive faster-than-light translation paths, the thing that made a Drakkar a living starship, was active. Ivil believed the bond was accelerating her development, feeding it, like a well-maintained engine running above rated efficiency because everything inside it was working together properly. She had also developed opinions. Wren could feel them now through the bond with a clarity that still occasionally surprised him, not just emotional impressions, but something closer to perspective. The way she looked at Warden Celis, the way she tracked Conclave officials when they walked through the lower level, not with hostility, with the calm, measuring attention of someone who has been quietly taking notes for a long time and has arrived at their conclusions. She communicated one of those conclusions to Wren one evening while he was doing calibration work on her scale sensors. The impression that arrived in his head was not an image or a word. It was a feeling, the feeling of being sorted, categorized, put in a box that had been built before you arrived. He set down his calibration tool and looked at her. She looked back. He said out loud that he knew that feeling. She made the low, running sound. The message from Yara arrived 2 weeks later. She had sent it to his personal comm, not his station ID, his personal one, which meant she had actually looked for it. The message was short. She was a colony ship captain. She did not waste words. She said people out on the frontier were talking about him. She wanted to know what he had done. She also said, in the last line, that things out her way were getting strange. Strange in the way that made experienced frontier pilots file their routes with extra buffer time. Wren wrote back the same evening. He told her he had fixed a breach and made a friend and that it was a long story. He said he hoped she was all right. He did not tell her about the bond metrics. He did not tell her about the reclassified data. He just asked her to keep him updated on the frontier situation because something about the way she wrote, strange, bothered him in a way he could not quite name. Sable could feel the unease through the bond. She did not try to argue it away. She just settled closer and breathed slow and steady, the way someone sits with a person who is thinking something through and does not need to be talked out of it. Warden Celis appeared at the bay entrance that Friday with formal paperwork and the expression of someone delivering news they expect to be resisted. Wren and Sable were summoned to a full bond assessment at Conclave Hub Meridian, an official evaluation, classification, assigned duties. The paperwork made it sound like an opportunity. Wren read it twice. He understood exactly what it was. Celis asked if there were any questions. Wren said no. He signed the summons. Celis turned to leave. She paused when Sable shifted, not blocking the exit, not threatening anything, just moving so that she was visible, just being present. She held Celis's gaze for 3 full seconds with those gold eyes. Celis looked away first. She left without another word. Ren scratched Sable behind the jaw ridge, where she had a patch of scales that were still soft from growth. "All right," he said, "let's go see what they want." Conclave Hub Meridian was built to make people feel small. It did this very well. The main structure was a rotating ring station large enough to house 60,000 permanent residents, encircling a central column that rose 3 kilometers from base to spire. Every surface was polished. Every corridor was wide enough for a diplomatic procession. The light was the particular kind of clean and directionless that came from hidden fixtures, designed so that no one cast a shadow in the wrong direction. Ren walked through it in his maintenance vest because he had not been issued anything else, carrying a single bag, with Sable moving behind him through the wide freight corridors that had been arranged for her passage. She had grown again during the journey. She was now roughly the length of a city bus, though she moved with a quiet, coiling precision that made her seem smaller than she was. The Conclave staffers they passed in the corridors stood well back and said nothing. The Bond Review Board convened the next morning. 7 chairs, 7 officials, 7 species. First Assessor Calder sat at the right end of the panel, a human man in his 60s, silver-haired, formally dressed in Conclave diplomatic colors. He had been Conclave's human representative for 22 years. He had spent those 22 years carefully, patiently building the argument that humanity belonged at this table. He looked at Ren the way a man looks at someone who has just knocked over everything he spent years stacking. Day 1 was Sable. They ran her through the physical evaluation in one of the assessment bays, a large pressurized chamber with sensor arrays built into every surface. Her scale density readings made one of the board's technicians quietly recheck the calibration. Her fold sense was active and mapped cleanly across the full transit range spectrum. When they tested her energy output, having her channel through the standard emission array, the numbers went high enough that a second technician left the room to report it to someone above them. The board recorded everything. They did not comment. Day 2 was Ren. He sat the standard rider evaluations and did exactly as well as expected. Low scores in combat aptitude, no tactical training to speak of, minimal political knowledge, no formal education beyond secondary technical certification. The board's recorder noted each score without expression. Ren answered every question honestly and did not apologize for any answer. Then came the Bond Coherence Assessment. It was a series of paired scenarios, unexpected situations introduced without warning, requiring the rider and Drakkar to respond simultaneously without speaking. The scenarios were designed to stress-test communication under pressure. They were calibrated to identify breakdowns, moments where a pair lost sync, where the rider tried to command instead of cooperate, where the Drakkar acted without the rider or waited too long for instruction. Ren and Sable had never been trained for this. They did not know the format. They had not practiced. The first scenario activated without announcement, a simulated hull failure requiring Sable to seal a section while Ren identified the breach source from a panel of false readings. Sable moved before Ren consciously registered the alert. She felt his attention shift through the bond and oriented to the same problem a half-second faster than he could have directed her. He was already reading the panel, fingers moving, eliminating false positives by touch and memory, because this was fundamentally the same problem as every diagnostic he had run in 6 years of maintenance work. He found the source. She sealed it. 40 seconds. The board's expected completion time for this scenario was 4 minutes. The second scenario, the third, the fourth, different shapes, different variables, but always the same essential thing underneath, an unexpected problem that needed 2 people to solve it as one. Every time the same thing happened, not dramatic, not fast, just clean. Ren read the problem the way he read every broken system, looking for the component that was failing, the path that still worked, and Sable moved to meet his thinking before he finished having it. They finished all 7 scenarios. The board's recorder had stopped writing at some point. He was just watching. On the evening of the second day, Calder pulled Wren aside into a small meeting room off the assessment corridor. He sat down across from Wren and was quiet for a moment, the way someone is quiet when they are deciding how honest to be. Then he told Wren, plainly, that the situation was embarrassing, that a station mechanic with a Tier 1 bond made humanity look like an accident rather than a civilization that had earned its place. He said that if Wren accepted a reassignment to the outer monitoring stations, away from the main conclave networks, out of the data streams, quiet, he could arrange it to look like a choice, a preference for frontier work. Nobody would have to be embarrassed. Wren looked at him. He asked quietly, when humanity had last produced a bonded pair before him. Calder said nothing. Wren said he understood what Calder had spent his career trying to do. He genuinely did, but he had not asked for any of this. He had sat on a floor and given a hungry animal something to eat, and what happened next was not something he had done to anyone. He was not going anywhere to make someone else comfortable with facts they did not like. He thanked Calder for his time and left the room. The board issued their verdict the following morning: Bond Tier 3, mid-level classification. The official reasoning cited training deficiencies and species integration concerns. The raw scores were not published. Dr. Ivell, who had traveled to Hub Meridian as Wren and Sable's unofficial liaison, read him the full numbers in a corridor outside the assessment wing. He did this without drama. He simply showed Wren the data sheet and pointed at the category columns. 6 of 11, Tier 1, before the modifiers were applied. Wren folded the sheet. He put it in his vest pocket, next to the bond registry paper he had been carrying since the first night. Outside, Sable was waiting in the freight courtyard. When Wren walked through the doors, she lowered her head until her forehead touched his chest, slow, deliberate, careful of her weight. She held it there. Ivell, standing a few steps back, said softly that the gesture had a name in old Drakkar behavioral records. It meant, "I know, I saw. It changes nothing between us." Wren put one hand on the side of her jaw. He stood there with her for a moment in the middle of all that polished, directionless light. Then he said, "Let's find out where they're sending us." The assignment was Calder's suggestion dressed in official paperwork: Ardent Frontier, Outer Patrol Sector, Monitoring Post Duty. A long way from Hub Meridian. A long way from anyone who might notice what was sitting in the registry data. Wren read the assignment orders and said nothing. He packed his bag. Sable folded her wings and followed him through the freight docks without being asked. The frontier was different from the station. Quieter in some ways, louder in others. The waypoint station at the sector's edge, a smaller, older installation called Relay Post Bren, ran on patch systems and short staff and the particular exhausted competence of people who had been doing hard work with insufficient resources for too long. Wren felt immediately at home. Yara's ship, the Ardent Margin, was docked for repairs when they arrived. She was standing at the base of the gangway talking to her engineer when Wren came through the bay doors, and she stopped mid-sentence and looked at him with the expression of someone who had been expecting a message to arrive and was surprised it showed up in person. She looked at Sable, who had followed Wren through the oversized freight entrance and now stood in the bay like a very large, very patient shadow. Yara said, "So that's the friend." Sable looked at her. After a moment, her tail moved once, a small, precise flick that Wren had learned meant acceptable. Yara looked at Wren. "Did she just approve me?" "I think so." "Good, we need to talk." They talked in Yara's navigation room, around a table covered in hand-annotated sector maps. Yara had been tracking the breach events herself, not because anyone asked her to, but because her ship kept nearly being caught in the aftermath, and self-preservation was a good motivator. 6 infrastructure attacks in 4 months, a communications relay, a fuel depot, a water processing hub, a repair station, 2 deep transit signal buoys that covered emergency distress routing. The 3 Conclave patrol ships in the sector had issued reports about each incident. The reports used words like unknown origin and under investigation and no confirmed perpetrators. Yara's reports used different words. She had dates, approach vectors, and power signature logs from her ship's passive sensors. Nobody had asked for them, so nobody had them. Ren spread the data across the table and looked at it. He was not a military analyst. He was not a tactician. He had no training in threat assessment or strategic evaluation. What he had was 6 years of looking at systems that were failing and asking, what is breaking and what is the pattern? The pattern here was infrastructure dependency. Every target was a load-bearing piece of the sector's survival network, not the most powerful pieces, the most connected ones. Whoever was doing this was not trying to destroy. They were mapping, pulling out the threads that everything else was tied to, one at a time, testing which removals caused the most downstream failure. He had seen this before. He had seen it in stations. A coolant system that nobody maintained because it seemed secondary until 3 other systems failed because of it. He said they're building a collapse map. When they have enough of it, they'll pull everything at once and the whole sector goes dark. Yara had been thinking something similar. She had not had a word for it until now. He looked at the map. He pointed to a deep relay communications hub 2 hours out at standard transit speed. If the pattern held, and it held with the consistency of a mechanical system, because whoever was doing this thought like an engineer, that hub was the next target. It linked the sector's emergency beacon network to the main conclave grid. Without it, a distress call from this sector would not reach anyone for 6 hours minimum. They left within the hour. They reached the hub with time to spare. Sable went dark. She had learned to suppress her scale glow entirely, moving through open space as something close to invisible and positioned in a waiting arc beyond the hub's sensor range. Ren sat in the small pressurized saddle point behind her neck ridge, where a rider sat during transit, and watched through the bond sense as Sable's perceptions spread outward like a still pool being touched. She felt them before the sensors did. 4 ships. Fast, low profile, running suppressed emissions, private military configuration. They came in at the angle Ren had predicted and began their approach to the hub. What happened next was not a battle in the way the Conclave's records of bonded pair combat described. There were no glory charges, no energy weapon displays, no dramatic announcement. Sable moved through them the way Ren moved through a failing system, component by component, without wasted effort. Targeting the parts that mattered, she disabled thruster arrays without breaching hulls. She sheared communication antennas. She placed herself between ships in their planned formation so that when they tried to regroup, they had to choose between collision and retreat. She jammed their fold sensor array at 12 minutes in, while they were still trying to understand where she was. Ren sat at the center of it, not commanding, not directing, thinking alongside her, seeing what she saw through the bond. When she felt a gap, his mind was already in it. When he saw a solution, she was already moving. 2 ships disabled each other trying to flank her. 2 more surrendered when they had no communications and no way to coordinate. The flagship attempted to jump and found it could not. Its captain, it turned out, was a practical person, and a practical person does not fight a battle they have already lost. The Deln Syndicate's records, when Yara's people pulled them from the captured ships, showed a corporate sponsor, a timetable, and a list of the sector's remaining infrastructure targets. The data went to Conclave Hub Meridian before the sun moved. The resource corporation involved had a full oversight tribunal on their hands within the week. The 3 Conclave patrol ships filed updated reports noting their increased surveillance efforts in the sector. Ren sent a 1-line reply acknowledging receipt and did not correct them. The formal notification arrived from the Board of Review 11 days later. Upon further analysis of assessment data, Bond Tier 1 classification across all categories, no modifiers applied, effective immediately. With it came an offer, a posting at Hub Meridian, full diplomatic and patrol access, resource allocation, the works. Ren sat on the deck plating in Sable's habitat bay, the same posture he always used when he needed to think, and read it twice. He put it in his vest pocket with the other papers. He looked at Sable. He asked her through the bond what she wanted, Not what was next, what she actually wanted. What came back was open space, forward motion, an uncharted direction, not the comfortable posting, not the center of things, further out where the map still had blank edges. He sent a reply to Ivil. They would take the Tier 1 designation. They would decline Hub Meridian. He was still composing the second message when Yara's voice came over the comm, dry and fond, and entirely unimpressed. You know, most people who get offered a Tier 1 posting actually take it. Ren closed his tablet. Most people don't have a better offer. Sable's scales shifted through a slow, warm cycle, the color she ran when something was exactly right. The hull hummed. She folded them into the dark.